Welcome to Poppy Shop. So today's tutorial I'm going to go over how to make a purse bag liner as well as a pocket to put in the liner. So to start, we're going to measure the width of the bag. So mine is about 9 inches wide. So the fabric, we're going to add an extra inch to each side. So I'm going to be cutting the width, which I've already done, to 11 inches. Next, we're going to measure the height of the bag. Now, I've already added a zipper to it, so the height I'm going to be measuring to is where the zipper is, because we're going to be stitching the bag liner right up to the zipper where the stitches are here. So the height of mine is about 9 inches. And then you want to add half of the width of the bottom of the purse as well. So mine is 2 inches. I'm going to be adding an inch to the bottom as well as an inch to the top for our fold over or seam allowance on the top. So once you've gone ahead and cut your liner, you actually want to I've doubled it, so you're doubling the height of the liner, and that just makes it so you don't have to do an extra seam along the bottom. So this will be the portion that sits in the bottom of the bag. So from here, we're going to sew a pocket on. Now I've already cut my pocket and measured it to where I want it, so I'm going to have it centered in the bag. And what you'll do is figure out exactly what size you want your pocket. I wanted mine large enough that I can fit my cell phone in it, and figure out exactly where you want it on the bag. Remember, there's that allowance you're going to have for the bottom of the bag as well as the sides, and then also the seam allowance on the top of the bag. So keep that in mind when you're figuring out what size. And I'm going to be doubling up the pocket like so, and that's going to give it a little bit of extra durability, as well as it's going to make it so that we have one less seam to sew on the top, because that's going to be a nice clean edge where the fold is. So I've already pressed or ironed the sides here, so that's going to make a clean edge on each side, and then we folded it over. And then from here, what we're going to do is figure out there's going to be about an inch of seam allowance on the bottom, so you want to position that and pin that, and we're just going to sew all the way along, and then we'll be flipping it up so we'll have a nice clean edge at the bottom. And then keep in mind when you're sewing, I'm going to use a sewing machine for this. You can hand sew it as well. Obviously, we're only going to be sewing onto one side, so you want to open up the inner liner, pin your pocket in place, so that's right about where I want mine. Make sure it's completely straight and level, and I'm just gonna pin that in place and then sew it with about an inch of space in between. So I've pinned the bottom of my pocket in place and made sure it's a nice straight line, and from here I'm just going to sew across. I'm going to start going backwards first, and then all the way across. And back. And then you'll see, once this is sewn in place, you can just flip it up It's a nice clean edge along the bottom, and I'm just going to press this as well with the iron, and then from here we're going to sew up the sides all the way to the top on both sides, right along the edge there. So I've got my pocket sewn in place. What I actually also did was just a little zigzag stitch along the bottom and then trimmed it just to make sure it's not fraying inside there. And then from here we're just going to start right on the edge, and you can pin this in place too. And I'm going to go right close up to the edge here. That's just my personal preference. And we're just going to sew all the way along right down to the bottom. Make sure everything's all tucked in, nothing sticking out. And then we'll complete the same on the other side, and our pocket is done. So I've pressed my fabric for the seam allowance along the top and the bottom, and I've also added a zigzag stitch along both just to prevent the fabric from fraying. So from here we're going to bring the right sides of the fabric so that they're touching one another and line up those top folds, and we're just going to stitch all the way down and having that 1 inch seam allowance on each side. And we'll complete the same on the other side. Great, and then I'm also just going to add a zigzag stitch along each edge here to keep the seams from fraying. And this is the inside of the bag, and we'll be placing it inside the purse as it's oriented right now. Alright, so I've inserted the liner and pinned it in place. So I started by pinning the seams to the edges first and then all along the top. And we're just going to hand sew it from here. So I'm going to start this right about here and then come in from the back of the fabric like so, and that's just going to hide the knot in behind. And then back through to the outside of the bag. And you'll notice I've just got it snugged up nice and tight to the top of the zipper there. And then we're going to come back through right next to that stitch we just placed. And we're just going to continue in this fashion all the way along to secure the liner. Right, so to use a sewing machine to sew the top of the liner in, I've got the liner cinched right up, nice and close to the zipper edge here. And we'll just sew along with the sewing machine, pulling the pins out as we go. So I finished stitching all the way around the zipper, and then again you can hand stitch that or use a sewing machine. I had a little bit of issues around the zipper portion, so I actually just used a sewing machine most of the way around, and then I just did the hand stitching right where the zipper is. You can see that easily closes and opens, and that bag liner is just going to help to keep your bag's shape and give it some durability and make sure that all your hard work and efforts last as long as possible.